I love my kitchen equipment, and I collect it, and I don't get rid of anything. So I have a lot of it. But having said that, you don't have to have a ton of stuff to make great cookies. But there are some things that'll make it a little bit easier. I'm gonna show you the essentials. In this chapter, I'm gonna talk about all the essential tools to make cookies. The scale and the measuring cups, the different types of baking sheets, and all the different ways that you can mix your cookie dough. Also, some of my favorite basics. So let's get started. If you're gonna buy one piece of equipment for baking, I say it's the scale. It's all about consistency, and weighing your ingredients makes all the difference if you want your batches to be the same over and over and over again. Use a kitchen scale. Measuring flour in a measuring cup can weigh different things every time, depending on how you do it. If you scoop and sweep versus spoon and sweep, it's gonna be a different amount of flour each time. Whereas when you weigh 1 pound of flour, it's always gonna be 1 pound of flour. If you do use measuring cups, make sure when you're measuring your flour, you'll put your flour in, sweep it level. The same is true for measuring spoons. You don't wanna dip it in there and have it heaping over, you wanna level it off. So these are the essentials for measuring your dry ingredients. We need to get the cookies into the oven, and we need some kind of a cookie sheet. One thing that I highly recommend is that you go with a cookie sheet that is a high gauged metal. So meaning it's very thick, they're really sturdy, they keep their shape because they're so thick. But the other thing about a thick metal pan is that it actually conducts heat. And so your cookies will bake more evenly. If you have a really, really thin metal sheet, it'll have hot spots and it just doesn't bake as evenly. You will have different results with different colored sheets. Notice that these are gold. These bake and conduct heat really nicely. These silver ones are really nice too. If you want a caramelized bottom on your cookie, you want to go with a darker pan because this is going to create a paler cookie because it's light. The dark color of the pan actually conducts heat. So the kind of pan that you use, you can get different results. So play with it and see which one suits your cookie best. Typically, you're gonna wanna bake the cookies on something. You're gonna have the cookie sheet, and then I usually use parchment paper. So I just have sheets of parchment paper that just fit right onto the baking sheet, and then I scoop my cookies and I bake them right on the parchment. It prevents a lot of cleanup. You can just throw out the parchment. If you don't wanna be throwing out so much stuff, you can also use a Silpat. And a Silpat is a silicone mat that just fits right onto your baking sheet and you can bake right on there. One thing to keep in mind, they're kind of thick and they're made out of the silicone, so they do add a little bit of insulation. So you're not gonna get a crispy bottom if you bake on this. It's also a great material to use if you want something to spread because it's very slick. And so things tend to spread more than they would on the parchment, which is a little bit porous, and so it grabs onto the cookie. It used to be that you would just like butter the pan and put the cookie dough right on there. The one nice thing about that is that you'll get a really nice, crispy, caramely cookie. You still can do that, but then you have the cleanup. And then when they come out of the oven, I like to put them onto a cooling rack so that the cookies will cool off faster. And especially if I want like a gooey center, I don't want it to continue to bake on the pan. You want to have something that's gonna fit all of your cookies. So if you're just doing a few, maybe get a little one. If you're making a bunch of cookies, then you're gonna want something bigger, whatever suits the cookies that you're baking. So next up are things to portion out our cookie dough, because it's really important that they're the consistent size when you're baking them. Depending on the size that you want, there's a cookie scoop to match it. But the nice thing about this is when you're baking something, you want them to be the same size so that they bake at the same rate. If I have some cookies that are small and some cookies that are giant, some will burn before some are even done baking. So a cookie scoop like this will save you a lot of guesswork. If you don't have a cookie scoop, you can just use a spoon and guesstimate. Or if you have a scale, you can weigh out your scoops and do it that way too. This is by far the easiest way. If you're gonna be doing a sugar cookie or any cookie that you have to roll out, you're gonna need a rolling pin. I've got lots of them. They're in different sizes, different shapes. So if you have a really nice soft dough, I kind of recommend a French pin like this, or even a dowel pin, which is very similar, except it's not tapered on the ends. And the reason I like this is because you have total control over the pin, and you can kind of feel the dough with your hands as you're rolling it. A pin like this, when you're using the handles, people have a tendency to press kind of hard with it. So a stiffer dough, something that has a little more body to it, this might work really well for you. It's a little bit heavier too, so it'll aid you when you're rolling out a stiff dough. There's even rolling pins that have prints in them, so I can push this down into the cookie dough and create this beautiful pattern without having done anything to it. Any of the pins will work. You just find the one that's most comfortable to you. And next thing you'll know, you'll have about a dozen of them stacking up in your kitchen. Speaking of sugar cookies, once you have them all rolled out with your rolling pin, you need something to stamp them out. So you need cookie cutters or some kind of a stamp. And I have a ton of them. I've been collecting them since I was little. My grandmother gave me some. So I have quite a collection, and they're actually in the other room because they couldn't even fit in my kitchen anymore. So come on, I'll show you all my cookie cutters. There's drawers and drawers of them. I have Christmas cookie cutters. Just about every holiday, I have a drawer. I have these beautiful ones for snowflakes. I even have a drawer of cookie cutters for Vermont because that's where I'm from. And of course, you must have a cookie cutter to represent your home state. You may not need a tower of them, but having a variety of cookie cutters is so much fun, and you can do so many beautiful cookies with them. Probably the piece of equipment that's the biggest workhorse in my kitchen is my stand mixer. It does so much of the heavy lifting for you. It's just a great piece of equipment. I typically, for cookies, will use the bowl and then a paddle attachment. And I have several different kinds. I highly recommend that you find a paddle attachment that has the rubber edge on it. This reduces so much of the work. You don't absolutely have to use a stand mixer. I spent decades making cookies out of a bowl. You want to use a nice big bowl and either a spatula that has some body to it, something that's a little bit stiffer that you can stir with, or even just a wooden spoon will do it. Another thing that I love is a rubber spatula so that I can get into the bowl and really scrape it clean, because you want to make sure your dough is nice and uniform. If I'm doing like sugar cookies and they're baking and I want to get them off of the pan, is I use a little offset spatula like this, and that way I can just slide this under and help me get it off of the pan. Another thing I use a lot in the kitchen, no matter what I'm baking, is a bench scraper. This is excellent for if I need to divide the dough instead of a knife. This also is my best friend when I am cleaning up. I can scrape all of my mess up off of the counter. This is just an all-purpose, multi-use tool in the kitchen. I swear it's gonna be your best friend. So just a few essentials that make the job a lot easier. In this chapter, we talked about all of my essential kitchen tools. You don't need a ton of stuff. You honestly can just use a bowl and a wooden spoon. But if you're making a ton of cookies, like around the holidays, you're gonna wanna gather some tools that are just gonna make the job a little bit easier. Thank you so much for joining me, and I cannot wait to see how your cookies come out.